Hi, everybody. Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. Today, I am with Arthur Buddy Phaneuf, who is a fourth-generation funeral director and has been running Phaneuf Funeral Homes and Crematorium since 1989. Prior to this time in funeral service, he worked in Washington, D.C. as a senior consultant and management consulting firm, Deloitte, and he holds an MBA degree in finance from George Washington University, as well as a BS degree in operations research from the University of New Hampshire, and an AS degree in funeral service from the New England Institute. He is a member of the National Funeral Directors Association and the New Hampshire Funeral Directors Association. So good morning and thanks for being here, buddy.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Yeah, it's great. Let's introduce you to our community and find out first by, a little bit of history about Phaneuf Funeral Homes and Crematorium and the communities that you serve. I do understand that you have 6 locations in New Hampshire and Vermont.
We actually have 7 now, and we also operate our sister company called the Cremation Society of New Hampshire, which is a discount firm, like most cremation societies are. And we serve our market area. New Hampshire and New England are quite tight geographically. So we serve the entire states of New Hampshire, Vermont, southern Maine, in northern Massachusetts, mainly from Boston north and from the seacoast out to the Berkshire Mountains. So it's a decent size market in terms of our staff with our locations. Over the years, we've also purchased about a dozen funeral homes that we've rolled into our existing companies, as you know, with cremation rates in small mom and pop firms. A lot of times the funeral home's real estate's worth more than their enterprise value of their business. And so we've purchased the goodwill of some of those companies and have rolled them into one of our brick and mortar firms. So we serve about 28% of all the deaths in the state of New Hampshire and serve about 4,000 families a year across our market area.
Wow, that's impressive. And it's important for people to know that, like you had mentioned your other organization, with the discount cremation, that is something that's so necessary for people in today's, economic environment. So, kudos to you guys for helping people in that way.
Thanks.
And obviously, as a full service funeral home, can you tell us a little bit of the range of services that, you guys offer to your families?
So it runs the gamut from, simple cremations. Interestingly, our funeral home actually competes with our discount firm in our markets for cremation because obviously they're at different price points, but it's also a different value proposition as well. So I won't necessarily get into the details of that. But yeah, we range from contracts for medical schools where, we're right smack in the middle of, the Boston major metro area. So we have a lot of people donated in the body of the science. We have contracts with the different medical programs. Of course, we offer cremation, full traditional funerals, ship outs. We do a lot of international shipping overseas. Believe it or not, even though we're in New Hampshire, we're quite a melting pot of different Congolese, Ugandan, Bhutanese families. So we get a lot of exposure over international shipping. So we're basically your typical funeral home, although larger than most, but we do all the great things that most funeral homes do.
And that's important for our viewers to understand, because a lot of people don't really truly understand a lot of times, the expanse of what a funeral director's responsibilities are. And I think that's important for people to know that because, funeral homes, you're doing some great work for your communities and you're making things happen. And those things aren't easy, in particular, sending people to different countries. And so I'm sure it's a full plate. And with that being said, we here at the Global Green Burial Alliance, we're green leaning, but we respect all options that are available. And, that would lead me to, and I think I know the answer because where you live, I feel like is a very green environment. But what inspired your eco-friendly services in particular? Was there an immediate need in your community or were you personally drawn to the idea?
I think a little bit of both. We actually have worked for years with Lee Webster, who I'm sure you know very well. And she approached us years ago to say, hey, we're looking for a friendly funeral home. We're not a competitor. We have families that sort of do it yourself, but do need the support of funeral homes. And Lee and I had some chats, and at that point we decided that we need to move forward with maybe some green options in terms of green burial and supporting families that might want to have a home wake and service and just use our services for transport. So yeah, we're available as for as much or as little. Everything doesn't need to be a $15,000 funeral with us. We'll support families in whatever way they want. Now, in New Hampshire and Vermont, where we mainly operate, we're 80 to 90% cremation rates. So, and I've had this discussion with many families, even though we have green burial options. When you take our cremation rate and then you take the families that, no matter what, they're still going to have a traditional funeral, they're still going to go to church, they're still going to, and the families that are doing anatomical donations, what you have left is a fairly small number of people that would consider, at least at this part of the country, would consider green burials. That doesn't mean it's not important for us to support that. It's just not something that we're not doing hundreds and hundreds of green burials. We're also in a market where funeral homes can own cemeteries, and most cemeteries are owned by the municipality or the church. There's very few, although there's getting more, there's very few quote unquote green burial cemeteries or conservation lands, and the ones that are available, we actually have pretty cold winters. And some of these small green burial cemeteries, they don't bury in the wintertime. So, poor mom passed away and wants a green burial and doesn't want embalming, doesn't want a casket, but the burial may not be for 4, 5, 6 months. So those are some of the issues that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. And that's great that you brought that up, because those obstacles are, they're real, and that does impact, the ability to perform these. But what I want to say to our viewers is that, let's talk about flame-based cremation. Certainly people may say, oh, it's got a large carbon footprint. At the end of the day, the way I view this is, our lives have a large carbon footprint, and it's really about how you memorialize your loved one after you have the cremains. So for the viewers to understand what I'm trying to say, imagine if everyone planted a tree as a living memorial for everyone who passed. So would the planting of that tree, if it grew to a full-grown tree and lived for 500 years, it would probably erase not only the entire life that was lived, but the cremation process itself. So there's a place for that. That's what's important for people to know. There's an important place.
Here's because I get into this discussion argument quite frequently with families about, we operate 5 crematories and do multiple thousand cremations, and
Right.
why aren't you offering alkaline hydrolysis? Now, it is not legal in New Hampshire. It is legal in Vermont. We haven't pulled the trigger on that. But one of the things that we do for our crematory is we buy carbon offsets to offset 100% of our carbon footprint. We actually worked with a crematory manufacturer and engineers to look at X amount of cremations that we do a year, how much CO2, how many tonnages of CO2 we're putting in the atmosphere, and we use a company that buys carbon up. So we operate theoretically a carbon neutral cremation process. So when I have families call me and say, you're putting CO2 into the atmosphere and you're doing this, I'm saying, what, we're carbon neutral. You fly airplanes, you drive car, are you buying carbon offsets? And they say, oh, no. And I said, well, we are. And then the other part of this is with again, I have a friend of mine who probably runs the largest alkaline hydrolysis facility in the country in Minnesota. And him and I have sort of, interesting discussions all the time. And yes, the process of alkaline hydrolysis theoretically seems like it's much more environmentally friendly, but in lots of parts of the country, there's a lot of electricity that it's needed to generate the heat. And that's from coal plants. And what do coal plants do? Well, they generate CO2. Mm-hmm. And depending on your municipality, you have the water that's left after that needs to be hauled away and put into some facility where there's acid or base in there, and you can't just necessarily dump it into the sewer system. Is that environmentally friendly? So you can't look at one piece, but you have to look at the entire process, both for cremation and both for that. We have looked at. We can't do it to scale yet, but I'm hoping we can do it within the next 10 years. Is that there's technology out there that allows you to recapture the CO2 and process it so it's not as going. Now, again, huge manufacturing companies are doing that now. I would think that our crematory manufacturers would be looking at that in the future. But again, at this point, it's just cost prohibitive, but we're moving in that direction.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you. It's all about transparency of process. Everyone wants to believe something is a little better than something else. But when you look at all of the wheels in motion, you're
Mhm.
100% correct. Even natural organic reduction. If we really want to get down to brass tacks, you and I both know that probably the most carbon friendly would just to be dig a shallow grave and place someone in it. But that's not,
Correct. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So I completely agree. And it's really about, again, it's about like, if you were to plant a tree, that's going to have an impact. So I mean, I
Mhm.
think it's important for people to understand that, we have to honor people's wishes, but there are certainly ways, and it sounds like, you guys are leading the pack there with, being responsible. And I do appreciate that. And thank you for saying it, because maybe others can take from your example. And, you talked a little bit about the severity of the winters, and I know quite, well how cold it is up in your area. A lot of other people might not.
Mhm.
But with that being said, knowing that New Hampshire and Vermont, and I think Vermont now even allows, if I'm home funeral or home burials, uh, do you have, other than the municipal cemeteries, do you have a lot of green burial options when it comes to preserves, or is it quite as limited as you say? So it's really a difficult hill.
There are a few municipal cemeteries that have established, a green section. There's really not any other than there's one in Vermont. It's a conservatory land. It's called Higher Ground. They are a quote unquote true green burial, but their role is really not to involve funeral homes to extent at all, which is fine. But they're often having issues where can we do the paperwork for the family? And we're sort of in or we're out. We're not, you're not going to hire our staff to. We had them call and say we want to use your refrigeration unit for a week, and that's all we do. We don't rent out our just little bits and pieces of our business, which is fine. So there is really not a full true green in our market that's really stepped up at this point, or at least marketed. But there are some hybrids that don't require vaults, and they're doing about as well as they can to be a green burial. We work with a cemetery who doesn't have a green burial section, but they allow us to at least invert the vault or the cement container, so the body is in. There's no casket required, so it's we're trying to work with them. And again, between just a small market, a small need. The Catholic Church owns a lot of the cemeteries in our part of the country, and they're not really interested for getting into the green burial for whatever reason. A lot of it has to do with maintenance and maintaining the facilities. So yeah, it's just a matter of time, I think, before it's getting more and more. But there's the hurdles that we talked about, from
Right.
demand to winters to funeral homes not being able to own this, and municipalities not wanting to pull the trigger on this. So all of the above.
Well, and it's baby steps. It's been a long road. It certainly has gotten, from 20 years ago when I started, we were barely crawling. Now I feel like we're starting to run. And I think what's interesting here is, and it's something that I could convey to you, and I think you probably would agree. What I've seen in my experience is that the majority, probably 75 to 80% of my customers, they're not environmentalists, let's say, per se. They're people who do believe in the environment, but
Mhm.
they had chosen a simple cremation as their option. And when they had learned about what we had done, they said, wow, that's kind of what we would like to have. And you and I both know that simple burials have always existed. Natural, green burial is not something anyone
It's
invented.
not anything new. All
No,
of
it's
our
not.
all of our Islamic families that we have I
Right.
mean, it's green burial. So yeah.
Right. So the real future is in conversations like this, educating people about an option that might interest them. And
Mhm.
as people start to ask for it, of course, more facilities and more people will then open that up. And with that being said, now that, obviously you guys have got your finger on the pulse with a lot of different properties. Have you seen, let's just use 5 years as an example. Have you seen an increase in interest among your families, let's say in the last 5 years? Have you seen an uptick, or has it been kind of a steady?
It's definitely increasing. There's a lot. We've actually, on our website, we did a green burial white paper. It's an asset that people can download to talks about, again, if it's something that's interesting to you. So we definitely have more interest. We probably do um, one or two green burials a month. during the times of the year that it can be done. We find mainly in our Vermont facilities, we find that there's a green burial cemetery there that we work with a lot, but they're seeing a lot of families doing everything themselves. So we don't have that number of how many families are handling this on their own. But it's more than we're doing. It's a decent, so there is some traction. One of the hurdles, of course, is people think green equals inexpensive, and that's not necessarily the case. So, there's education around, there's also all kinds of reasons why someone would want green burial, but it's not going to be the price of cremation. You have to buy cemetery properties and still do transport of the body and refrigeration and other things that, it's not going to be $10,000, but they think it's going to be, a few $100, and that's not. So it's an education, and we have a seminar every year that we do and talk about alternative arrangements. And we certainly talk about green burial and why it makes sense for some people and why it might not make sense for other people. Just give the information out there and let families make an educated choice on their own.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Allow it to sell itself. That's what's most important about the process.
Yep.
And to the consumers watching this, I want to just let them know, from my experience that, people can, we do have families, a very small percentage do this on their own. It is possible. But I will say that, people like Buddy, they play such an integral part in the process, and you want this to be a memorable experience. So please don't, dismiss the idea of using a funeral director, because the funeral director is so important, with the permits and the transportation and the refrigeration and the care of the body. So
and there's no do-overs in funeral service. You got one shot at getting it right.
No, you're absolutely right. So it's, I always champion and support the funeral director because I see how much they do for my families, and that's important to me, that lasting memory. So
I think a lot of funeral directors, and maybe it's because they're not reading about it, or they're choosing not to open up their minds a little bit, as they consider organizations like yours a threat to our industry rather than a partner. And I think that needs to be there needs to be a paradigm shift where, no, it's just another alternative. And we want to have great relationships with you folks, rather than consider you all an adversary. So
absolutely. I mean, we're in this together, and I have great relationships with all the funeral homes that I work with because of the fact that we were so welcoming to the funeral homes, because that's what's important. So I'm glad that we can say that out loud, because we have to work together, and we should, because we're going for the same common goal, to serve our families and make this process as not only as easy, but again, oddly enough, because a lot of people would say, why would anyone want a funeral to be memorable? Well, we're taking it, and it's a celebration of a life that was lived, and people should, change their mindset. You're going to be grief stricken, but you should leave happy, knowing that you did the best you could for that individual. So I applaud the work that you've done. And this is a funny question, because I interview a lot of startups. And of course, you're not a startup. You're someone who's been, and I'm so glad to have your perspective. You're someone who's been in this business for an awful long time, and you see it from a lot of different angles. So this question I usually ask, I say, where do you want to see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Well, you guys have been around a long time. So I guess I'll rephrase it and say, where would you hope to see the environmentally, like the environmental services that you offer? Where would you like to see them maybe in the next 5 to 10 years? Would you like to see that increase? How would you like to see that maybe unfold?
I would. I mean, I think, and I'm not answering a question directly, but I recently did a seminar on, sort of the changing. There was a wave in funeral industry about the consolidators, the SCIs of the world buying firms in the 70s and 80s. And then the next wave of change in our industry was cremation, where that's had a significant change. I think I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I could be wrong. The next wave in funeral service is AI. And how is that going to impact, whether it be AI with green burials, AI with this? I mean, if you think outside the box, I mean, crematories running or our robots running in our crematories, using AI to write obituaries. I mean, my staff now uses AI all the time to help write obituaries, AI for data entry. And, I haven't really thought about how AI would be incorporating with green burial, but I'm sure there's people smarter than me that can figure that out. So yeah, I think that's going to be the next trend in funeral services, is leveraging this amazing AI technology into changing our market again, like cremation did, like consolidators did. And that's where I actually are meeting next week with an AI consultant to have him. He knows nothing about funeral service, and letting him say, this is what we do. Where can we be in 5 or 10 years using technology to move the needle in terms of either providing better experiences for our family, lowering our cost of doing business. And of course, once we integrate this and lower costs, and this, then it goes, hopefully goes to the consumer, where now we're offering these, whether it be green burial, whatever, at lower price points, or maybe options that we couldn't even do before. So that's I know I didn't answer your question directly, but
No,
yeah.
but it's an interesting perspective. People have to understand how this changes, and how it's going to impact. And, and I think, just to lend a little bit of what I see, I see more cemeteries and more funeral directors embracing the concept as more of the cremation converts start to come out of the woodwork and say, we would rather have something a little more green, let's say, for their funeral service. So no, I think it's great. Again, these are the conversations that need to be had. People need to understand how these mechanisms work, and realize that in the funeral industry, we're all in this together. And I will say to everyone here today, when I used to go attend conventions, years ago, I can remember some of the people, that I worked with, who would say, "Why in the world would you go and to one of these conventions?" And I would say, because it's necessary, because if there's no one there, if there's no voice to be heard, then there will never be any change. And people need to understand that these people aren't our enemy. And I have never been treated poorly by anyone at any of these events or anything else, because ultimately our goal is the same. So I really appreciate the fact that you were able to come on here today, buddy. Thank you. Anyone who would like to know more about Phaneuf Funeral Homes, go to phaneuf.net. And yeah, I mean, thank you. We appreciate it. And we're here to support. So if you have anything that you're doing in the future, any seminars, anything like that, let us know, and we'll spread the word for you.
Great. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time today, Ed.
All right, you're welcome.